Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture, a premier manufacturer of LED lighting with the industry's greatest variety of fixtures for your complete lighting needs. Aperture recently announced the new Storm family of lights. With LED white light quality that matches natural daylight and classic tungsten bulbs, plus extreme low-end dimming while maintaining color quality. Discover more about the new Storm lights and the complete Aperture lighting ecosystem at aperture.com. Today we're speaking with a production designer. Her credits include BROKEBACK MOUNTAIN, Carol, and The BRUTALIST. We're pleased to welcome Judy Becker. Judy, thank you for doing this.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We'd love to start with our first question, which is always, how did you get to where you are today? Where did you grow up? Were you always rearranging the furniture as a kid, or did you find something else? Tell us your story.
Well, it's a long story. I grew up in a suburb of New York City and was always coming into the city with my mother and visiting museums. And I was very interested in art from as long as I can remember, which goes back to 3 or 4 years of age. So when I say when I was a kid, I mean 4, 5, 6. I don't mean 14. And art was always my biggest interest. And then it led to interior design. And again, when I was 6, 7, 8, in my doll houses and rearranging that furniture. And at one point I realized that if I kept my own things, my life-size things very neatly and arranged those, I would never lose anything. So I started arranging my things in a very neat manner, became a bit OCD about it, actually. And so my interest in art expanded to my interest in design and architecture. And this was all by, the age of 10, I would say. So it was a snowball effect in a way. That's how I started seeing it. One thing layered onto another thing, onto another thing. I didn't know any of these jobs existed in film. And I didn't really know much about film at all. I watched a lot of junky TV growing up, and I don't think it hurt me. So let your kids watch TV, why not? I did see movies with my parents, and some of them were, even French movies with subtitles for kids, but started drawing interiors, like sort of fantasy interiors for myself. And the funny thing is that I looked back at this whole book of fantasy interiors I did when I was about 10 or 11. They were like a tenement apartment with a crack in the wall and a extension cord hanging over the refrigerator. And I looked at that and I was like, I was designing that already at that age. Like, where did I get that from? I mean, I didn't live in a place like that. I lived in a house in the suburbs. So it was kind of eye-opening to realize that these certain aesthetics had been in my head all my life. And, and others were like a bohemian thing, that much more typical of the things I was thinking about. But the fact that I was thinking about those kinds of realistic details when I was so young was really interesting to me. And I know that when we would visit my mother's relatives or friends or my father's relatives, I was such an observer of their living environments, and they made a huge, huge impression on me. And I've taken from those early observations and really used it in some of my work. When I designed Ryan Murphy's version, Joe Mantello directed it, but Ryan Murphy produced it, a new version of The Boys in the Band, the film. I modeled it after my aunt's apartment that I remember from when I was like 7 or 8. And it had made such a huge impression on me. And I remembered the layout, and I thought it would be so great as a beginning for the design of the Boys in the Band apartment. So don't discount those early experiences. They can be hugely inspirational. And then when I was in high school, I was 13 or 14, I became obsessed with film because I went to a very arty high school, and a group of friends and I started watching foreign films on TV. And then it the high school was attached to a university. So we started going to all these films, retrospectives and like art films at the university. And that's when I became kind of a little cinephile, a little baby cinephile. And, but I still didn't know like cinematography existed as a job and that production design existed as a job. So that wasn't in my head like as a future. I wasn't really thinking about the future like most high school kids, I think. So then I went to college, and when I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my cousin worked in the film business in New York. She was an assistant camera person. She was doing very well. She worked on a lot of interesting movies. And she said, you should go work in the art department. You might like that because you like art and design. And I was like, okay. And I discovered, that these various jobs existed. And I worked as a PA for a while. And I thought I wanted to be a prop master. I really still was very unfocused, but at least I had found this area.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while for me to realize I wanted to be a production designer. And I worked as a set dresser. And I have to say that starting at the bottom, as I did, taking out garbage, observing really everyone do their jobs, professionals do their jobs, prop masters and lead men and set dressers with a lot of experience and set decorators, production designers, just seeing how everything was done was a really great education. And it was the right education. I think I really believe that. I think you learn things that way you're not going to learn in film school. And the other things that I think are important, I learned on my own because all of the sources of inspiration were something I'd been learning my whole life, because I loved it. So I personally don't know what you get from studying production design in a school, except skills like drafting and learning certain computer programs that you use as a set designer or maybe an art director. And those are positions that can lead to becoming a production designer. But you can also learn those while not going to film school. So the things that I think are really important to become a production designer are learning how films are made from watching and observing and having an interest in design and film and art and all the things, because you have to have ideas and you have to be interested and you have to be inspired. And if that doesn't come from within, then you need to think about whether this is the right career. And I discovered it just by happenstance that it was the right career for me. And once I realized that it was, I felt really confident. I had to get over this hump of like not been trained as an architect or as a theater designer. And I had some insecurities about that. But once I got over that, I felt very confident and I just went forward. And I had a lot of people telling me, I met on a lot of jobs that I didn't get. And I had a lot of people telling me, oh, you didn't go to architecture school. No. But, I overcame that. So I think you can. It's just, you can't overcome not being interested in anything that's going to lead to ideas. Like that would be a problem.
So you worked in the art department for a while. What was your first movie as a production designer and how did you get it?
My first movie as a production designer was called Sublet, and it was a Spanish film that was being shot in New York. And it really just fell into my lap. Like I wasn't looking for it. And someone asked me if this was like in the 90s. I wasn't even looking for a production design job. It was right before production design became popular, so it was like they were looking for someone to do it. And I just did it. I didn't have a great experience, but I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. It was before I became convinced that this was right for me. So I also had like two people working for me, but I did learn a great lesson on that job. And it was a lesson I tell everybody. It's like one of my favorite anecdotes because we were shooting, and this was back when Hell's Kitchen was undergoing, I guess, urban renewal. So there were all these empty tenement buildings and people were shooting in them. It was a place that you shot a lot. So we were shooting in like a fifth floor walk up, and this was where the protagonist lived. And there was a kitchen. It didn't have a refrigerator. So I had two people working with me, and I said, we have to bring a refrigerator up here, because it's a kitchen and we need a refrigerator. So they two people, and neither of them were like, big and strong. So it was like my friend Lily and my PA Eddie, they're both pretty like small people, and they lugged this refrigerator up the stairs. We were all very young, so it wasn't that bad. And they get it up, we put it in the kitchen. DP comes up and he says, "Get that out of here." And I said, "But it's a kitchen. We need a refrigerator." And he said, "No one's going to notice if it's not there." And I was like, "Oh." And I thought, that's true. Like, you don't notice if it's not there. And that was such a big lesson.
Yeah.
And I've used it and applied it so many times. You don't notice if it's not there, but you notice if it's there and it's wrong. You definitely notice that. But if it's not there, like, whoever notices that the refrigerator's not there? I mean, this was a tiny kitchen, by the way, and you would never notice, but it's really true. And I've even probably on the Brutalist, I had to use that lesson, because there's this instinct it's a kitchen, it needs a refrigerator. And I'm not saying it's always the refrigerator, it can be something else, but there's always the instinct to do to make it real in that sense. But that's not always a reality that you need to reproduce. So it was a great lesson. It was a really important one, and I've always remembered it.
And does that apply when you're doing period pieces as well? Because some people are very strict on period, but sometimes...
No, it applies to everything.
Yeah.
It applies to everything. Doesn't matter what period it is. You don't notice what's not there, period or not. If it's scripted that she's opening the refrigerator, it better be there. I mean, the refrigerator, like in Garden State, that was a big character, the refrigerator. But, it's like, if it's never seen, it's never scripted, you never need it. Yeah, don't have it. I'm pretty strict about period. I think that sometimes it's okay to be loose with it a little bit. I don't know if I've ever been that loose. I mean, I think that you can be loose about the deep background, like Boogie Nights is one of my favorite movies. I think it's an amazing movie. And I've watched the opening a bunch of times just to see how he did it. And I know that in the opening, there's a lot of non-period signs in the background, but it doesn't matter. It passes the test. And of course he couldn't, and I'm glad that he didn't like CGI them and like, screw with the whole thing. It looks great. Opening's amazing and it works. So I think in times like that, just leave it alone, shoot it. It's fine. You're not thinking about it. Other times it is important. And it really depends on the context, on the shot, on what you're trying to say, on what you're looking at. I did a movie about Truman Capote called Infamous. Not many people have seen it, because it came out a year after Capote came out, although they were both made at the same time.
Yeah.
And Art Mai was very meticulous in Infamous, and we were slightly bigger budget than Capote, and it was a different story than Capote and a bit more elaborate, and our sets were more elaborate. And I built a lot of sets, and I was very proud of the work I did. But one of the sets I had a lot of trouble with was supermarket where he goes to try and find caviar or something cheese, and it's just Velveeta cheese. And I'd also had this trouble on BROKEBACK Mountain, which I had done the year before, a period supermarket, because I had a lot of research on a period supermarket. I still have this great book called The Progressive Grocer, and it's like from 1960, and it has all these images of supermarkets from that time with all the signage. And the problem is when you do it, like in the book, it looks so fake. It just looks like a fake movie version of a supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this Velveeta display, and it just looked so corny and cliched and not real, even though it was accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never happy with it. I mean, we shot it and it's there, but it just looked not like me. It didn't look like something I would design, and I was never happy with it. And then a few years later, I watched Capote, and the way they did it was he's in the supermarket. The way I remember it is like there's one sort of shelving unit behind him that's got Campbell's soup on it or something that looks period. And then the rest falls into darkness. And I thought, okay, that looks great. That looks really great. I know not all those cans are period, but it doesn't matter because it passes and it looks fine and it looks really good. So it was a simple way of solving a really difficult problem. And I felt like it looked a lot better than what I did, which was making this huge effort to make it period correct. And I often say that reality often doesn't look real on camera. And I think maybe I've never said this before, but period doesn't always look real on camera either. So it's a thorny issue.
I think maybe also because people weren't there in the period, so they don't have that reference. So they're looking at something that's different to them. And if they haven't seen it a million times, they think, you're making that up.
Right. Yeah. Although I also think there's people that love it, that love all that stuff, and I know my fellow designers seem to love it, like the stuff. And I love working my favorite set decorators. And I think they know me well enough that they always overdress the sets so I can come in and take stuff away, and that is a good way to work, because it's better to take away than to come in and say, like, do we have enough stuff, But there is an attachment to that. And working in a more minimal way, I think, is something that I like to do and that I feel is pretty accurate for most periods that I've worked in. And I've never really seen much period reference for like the 20th century up till the 80s, maybe, where you look at it and say, wow, they had a lot of stuff, it just doesn't happen that often.
Yeah. And I imagine also doing period, you need to make sure that you have things from before the period, because everybody's got old stuff, and that the stuff is worn down. It's not in pristine shape.
And especially people from all socioeconomic classes, because there's inherited stuff. And if they're wealthy, they have inherited stuff or antiques. And if they're middle class, they have things from their families. So it's definitely something you have to work in, and that makes it look real. Most people have stuff from other periods in their apartment. You just don't want to have stuff from the future. You try to avoid that.
That's a dead giveaway.
Yeah.
So you did work on Garden State, which was very low budget, right?
Yeah. Was it $2.5 million? Yeah.
Was it fun? What were your challenges on that?
It was really fun. I mean, first of all, most movies you do when you're just starting out are really fun, because it's just exciting to be doing it. And, it's my first studio movie, because it was Jersey Films. And I was so excited to be not working on something that wasn't funded by the director or something. So it was really fun. But I had a great time on that. It was so fun. The sets were so fun. And there was such great energy on the set. Got to do all these crazy things. And every character was unique, and Zach had scripted so much fun stuff. So I can't take credit for it. And it was challenging because the one thing I was scared of were all the sight gags, he's in this shirt that matches the wallpaper, and doctor's office, the certificates go up onto the ceiling. And I was really worried about that looking so comedic and dumb. So I worked really hard to dress it in a way that it looked almost natural, so that the certificates were a little shabby and really fit on the wall in a kind of makeshift way. And it almost made sense that he would go up onto the ceiling because everything was so crammed in. And I just tried to make it very naturalistic and almost gritty in a way so that it felt real. And with the shirt and the wallpaper, I just picked to me, it was such suburban New Jersey, sort of middle class, pattern that wasn't cool, and it wasn't cute. And it was just it was like a burgundy and teal paisley that just felt like what his aunt would have picked. And so it felt like it would have faded. You wouldn't have noticed that pattern except because of the shirt. So it wasn't two things competing with each other. It was one idea, the shirt and the wallpaper. And that was what you noticed. And you wouldn't have noticed either on their own.
Yeah. That's good.
It's actually, I just realized. I mean, so a lot of these things you do instinctively, and then when you have to think about them, you realize that's what you were doing.
That's true. And you're asked to explain it, and you go, well, I don't know.
I've learned a lot about what I do.
And then you did BROKEBACK Mountain. How much did Ang know about the cowboy culture?
I mean, Ang was pretty knowledgeable. He was really, really detail-oriented. So he wanted us to make a movie that, even at that time, if anyone Googled and did a lot of research, they would not be able to find anything wrong. That was the goal. And, I don't know if you can ever meet that goal. And now it would be even harder. But even then, that was the goal, that no one could look something up or Google something and do all this research and say, oh, that was wrong for the period. So it was actually really nice way to work because, it's a very common in period scripts to sort of show time passing by having things announced on the television. And I don't know if Aang really wanted to do that. I did find out that in the towns where the story was taking place, they didn't get reception for those kinds of programs. They only got the farm reports.
Oh,
so
wow.
it was a moot point. They couldn't have gotten those stories in the early 60s and mid 60s, which was really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I researched everything like that, like where that type of electrical tower, would you have seen it in Montana, in a small town, wherever it was. And I don't think I've ever done as much research into a period as I did on BROKEBACK Mountain. Like everything was so specific. And we tried really hard not to show anything that wasn't accurate for the time and the place. So I really enjoyed working on it because I think I had the time to put that much effort into it. I happened to have a really good crew that was like mostly Canadian, local to Alberta, local to Calgary. And just by chance, they were great. I found my set decorator. She was from Toronto, and I've worked with her she worked on The Brutalist. And so whenever I can hire her, I do. She's Canadian, so it's not easy for her to work in the United States. But she came to Hungary and worked on The Brutalist. And so it was my first period movie. So it's a pretty good one to have done. And I was a little nervous, but not that nervous. Not nervous enough. So, I wasn't so nervous that I didn't go for it, So it was really, and I did some really minimal stuff on there, and I'm really proud of it. So it was, and I also learned a lot. Like I had a lot of plans. I think I had this period wallpaper I was going to put up in Heath and Michelle's nursery, and where Heath goes in. Is trying to calm down the crying kids, a very nightmarish scene. And we had stripped the old wallpaper off, which was like a 70s wallpaper. And what was underneath was amazing looking. It was like this old blue, like paint. And I just left it because it looked better, and I was like, why ruin it? It just looks really good. So those lessons about not always having to do what you had planned, but you finding something through serendipity is really also, I think, an important thing to recognize and to realize and to go with that flow, So it's doesn't always have to be how you planned it. Be open to those surprises, I think.
And then also you're working with different people. You work with so many different directors.
Yeah.
Don't you have to also suss out their process first and fit yourself around that? Yeah,
a lot. And when I worked with Aang, and at that time, I hadn't worked with that many people, and I didn't really have everyone I had worked with was similar in the sense that they had written it. Well, Aang hadn't written his script, but he had rewritten it, and he was he was an established filmmaker, and he was very involved in the visual aspects of the filmmaking. He had a really good eye. He really thought about it. Since then, and I've worked with some filmmakers that aren't as involved in the visual aspect of the filmmaking. Maybe they're more oriented towards the actors and the blocking and the dialogue and not as much in the visual. So those kinds of directors, it's a different kind of process. So, and I've had to learn to work with that. And it's always easier for me to work with a director that is very visual and also on the same page visually with me, when we feel like we have a real connection in that sense, which obviously I felt with Brady on The Brutalist, and have felt many times with a lot of directors. It's sometimes hard, when you don't have enough money to do everything.
Always hard.
But when you all feel like you're connected and you're a team and you're all working together to realize this vision that is, generated in the beginning by the director, it's a great feeling. And it's one of the reasons I didn't mention in my long story about my becoming a designer that in high school, I also discovered the joy of collaboration, because I discovered the theater department when I was 13, and I started working in the theater department and acting. And that teamwork was something that made me incredibly happy. Like for the first time in my life, really, I was like filled with joy at this feeling of working with a team to create something. It was a really important moment for me. So that feeling in film where you feel that you've all worked together to create this thing that you're all happy with, it's a great feel. It's a really great feeling. And I love it. And it doesn't happen that often where you feel that it's really been this team effort where everyone's on the same page and everyone gets along, and
Yeah.
so it is a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've also worked a lot with David O. Russell. Now,
Yes.
is he more kind of fluid? Do things change for him? And
Things
do you
do
have
change
to?
with David. I think that David really, really comes alive during the shoot. I mean, that's where and I've seen the difference between David in prep and David on the shooting set, and it's like magic. I mean, when he's with the actors and he's on the set, you see this, it's like he becomes like magic, because all these ideas and he becomes so inspired. And I think when I first started working with him, I'd seen, I think, all of his movies, but I watched them all in a row. And I noticed this magical thing about the way his actors move. And it's almost like dance, there's this constant movement in his actors that only happens when he's on set with them. It's not planned, it's inspired in the moment. And that's who he is. And I don't think that prep for him is mostly working on the script and thinking about the script and thinking about the dialogue. And he's not as, I'd say, focused on the visual aspect. It's not that he's not interested. I would say that it's hard for him to visualize until he's there. So I have to sort of make it come alive for him in prep. And then he sees it. Once he sees it, he doesn't make a lot of changes. It's not like he gets to set and says, oh, I hate this now. You have to change. That doesn't happen. But he does get inspired to add new things, which then I have to go find, and make happen. But I've always done it. And those things always end up in the movie. So,
so it's important.
Yeah. Because if he's thinking of them on the day, that means it's really important to him.
Yeah.
So there was a set in American Hustle that it was scripted. I think it was Alessandro De Nivolo's office. And I don't remember what party it was, it was mayor or whatever. And we barely had enough furniture to dress it because we were dressing like 5 offices in this one building in Salem, Massachusetts. And I think they started improvising on the day. And so that's a really long scene in the movie. And there's like 3 pieces of furniture in it. But it's great. It's a great scene. I'm just like, like that was the room they had to it's like 20 minutes of the movie. So, but it's funny. I've even joked with Alessandro about it. It's a very good scene, but it's like not the best set I did for that movie. So, those, I don't care if the movie's good and my work looks good. It's like, I don't care if like a good set got cut or any of that. I'm doing it for the movie and I'm doing it for the director. So, sometimes I'm a little sad, like, oh, they didn't use that set or that, that thing, but I don't get too attached to it. And I don't want anyone to, like, sometimes a decorator gets really attached to something that the director throws out right away. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, we're doing it for the director. We're doing it for the movie. So if they don't think it works, it's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
What I don't like is if I have to add something that I think is really wrong. And it's happened on occasion, not very often, but it's happened on occasion on movies that I'm not proud of and that I don't think came out well, because if that's happening a lot, it's not a good sign. And, like you're forced to make a stupid sign, like that signifies everything. Those kinds of things are just bad. Or
and it's always at the last minute, so you don't have the chance to discuss it and explain why it's wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you've been working in like on locations mainly, haven't you? In real situations, so you're like creating an environment for the director to work with the actors in, rather than creating specific sets that service specific shots. You understand what I mean?
Not so much. I mean, it might seem that way, but a lot of David's later movies, I built a lot of sets, and it's nice that it doesn't look that way. But American Hustle, Amy's apartment was a set. The Plaza Hotel was a set. There were some big sets in there. and they were a big part of the movie. So it was like, I would say a third sets, maybe a little more than a third sets, and the rest locations or enhanced locations.
I just wonder about the choice between location and set. I mean, like a garden state, for instance, probably all shot on location,
all
right?
locations,
Yeah.
But those was a very low budget movie.
Right.
So you can't build a good set on a 2 point. If the set is the whole movie, maybe, but if you have a lot of locations, you can't do it on 2.5 million. American Hustle was a much bigger budget movie, so you can make that choice. And so once I started doing movies more at that level, I started building a lot more sets. And I think it's good. You need to have some money because it takes money to make them look real enough to be believable. If you're just slapping up some Luan and putting paint on it, it's not going to look very real. And in fact, it's going to look terrible. So the time that it takes to make a set look realistic is long. It takes many layers, and it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a good eye, and it takes a crew that's willing to put that time into it and that knows what they're doing. So I've spent a lot of time on sets that I'm proud of, and sometimes people don't realize, people in the business don't realize it's a set, which I like, they say, what location was that? And I'm like, so, but when I worked with Ryan, I did a lot of miniseries with Ryan Murphy, and we built a lot of sets, huge sets, gigantic sets. And for, everything I did with him, basically. And because you have to go back and back to them again and again. So of course you're going to build it. And I learned so much from that. And I would never be allowed to build those kinds of sets in a movie. I don't think, really. I mean, they were very expensive sets, and they were, he let me do a lot for them. And I've never had that opportunity in a feature, but I'd like to, as long as it was a good feature. But I used to be much more location oriented because I think reality for me, in the kinds of movies I do, the world has to feel real. It's easier for it to feel real in the location, and it's harder for it to feel real in the set. You have to put a lot more effort into a set to make it feel real. So, but I've now gotten to the point where I feel like it can be either, and I can make it feel real as long as everyone else does their part to make it feel real. Because a location can feel unreal too if the light looks unnatural, So it just really all depends. And I've built sets that were lit in a way that looked so wrong for the time and the place where it was taking place that I was just like, I put so much effort into making it look real, and then it didn't. So it has to be everyone working for the same goal, together. And I've also done sets that were supposed to look fake, and that's really fun to do too. That look. I've done a few movies that had movies within the movie where you're building movie sets, within the movie, and sort of distinguishing between those and the sets that are supposed to look like real places is really fun. So it's fun to have fun with something and making it look like obviously fake. So there's so many ways you can have fun doing that.
Yeah. And have you ever been in a situation where the director will say, only build 2 walls of the set. I will never see the other 2 walls. And do you have to determine whether you can believe him or whether you need to back yourself up?
It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
And if it's a director I know well, like David, I'll just say, are you sure? Like, are you really sure? Like, do you promise? Like, I'll just talk to him like that for like a lot, because I can.
Yeah.
If it's another director that maybe I don't feel like I can, talk to like that, I'll just talk to the producers. I'll just get assurances from everybody and make sure everyone hears it, because I don't want to become the scapegoat for some horrible situation, down the line. Otherwise, I try to give them a 360 situation, because that's usually what they want. And if they want a very limited situation like that, it's usually for a good reason, and or necessitated by something like the limitations of a location or of a day or of a schedule. So I just really discuss it with them in detail, and make sure that everyone's on the same page. Obviously, with the director of photography, because he's a big, or she is a big part of that decision making. So the more discussion that goes into it, the more comfortable I feel.
I think also sometimes you can kind of get the feel pretty soon that that's not going to necessarily be true. Like a director that says, no, we're going to shoot it very precisely, but we'll also shoot a whole lot and I'll decide in the cutting room. Well, that's two different things they've said in one sentence.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you
I've
kind
never
of get
had
that
someone
feel.
like that, but that's a nightmare. It sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah. Because you
yeah.
kind of have to, you don't want to be the one to hold up the shooting that day while you put up that
No.
third wall.
No. I mean, I've had situations, and again, where they've asked for additional sets, but everyone knows that it was a last minute request. And so I'm not holding up shooting because there's plenty of other stuff to shoot. So fortunately, I've never been, that I can remember, I might have blocked it out if I was the person to hold up the shooting set, which is my nightmare.
Yeah, right.
So,
That's the crime we all don't want to do.
Yes. I don't think I've ever been the person whose cell phone goes off in the middle of a shot.
Yeah.
So it's like the other crime.
Yeah, right. That would be bad.
I remember when we were shooting The Fighter and they hired a real person to play the cop. He was a real cop. And he's in the middle of a scene and his cell phone goes off and he answers it. He's like, hello. And it's like, it was really funny,
Oh my gosh. That's when
I think he was in a scene with Mark Wahlberg, by the way. It wasn't just like a nothing scene.
Well, that's when you realize that there are civilians and then there's the rest of us.
Yeah, exactly.
When you did The Brutalist, you must have worked with a lot of local crew, right?
Yes.
And had you ever been to Budapest before?
I had. I'd been to Budapest twice, right around the time that right before it stopped being part of the Soviet Union. So I did see it, and it was also always, I think, one of the more, I don't want to say capitalist because it really wasn't, but it did have some private enterprise. So it was a little less strictly run than some of the other Soviet countries. And I do remember that. I remember going to a privately owned restaurant that some friends of mine knew. Like I had friends there, friends I'd met in the United States that were from there and lived there. But it was very, very different at the time I went there. And so going back it was a very different city. But I still recognized parts of it, sort of. And there were still remnants of that there. And but it's changed a lot. I think that the Soviet culture has still affected it enormously, and there's definitely material supply issues, I think, that are not just a result of the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, there were a lot of things that were involved with that, which I suspect, I brought a lot of my own office supplies, partly because there's things that I like to use that I didn't know if they'd be available, and partly just they're expensive. I wanted to save them some money and just, just get what I wanted without having to make a fuss about it. So, but as it turned out, so yes, and I did have a lot of local crew, and I also, from the start, brought my set decorator, the same one that did BROKEBACK Mountain, and eventually I ended up bringing an art director too, because the communication issues became difficult, really difficult with construction. So I really needed someone to sort of be there as a intermediary, because I couldn't do it all myself. So his name was Alex Lindy. And then at that same time, I got a more experienced Hungarian art director who was great, and his name was Csaba Lodi. And so those two worked together, and they were that was when the things started to go like more easily. Because before that, I had a pretty inexperienced crew at the art director level, and it became increasingly difficult. I don't want to say bad things. They were trying, but they just didn't have enough experience, because it's a very difficult movie to do on no money. And I think that people often think it's a low budget movie, hire young people who are starting out. But in fact, you have to hire people who really know what they're doing in order to figure out how to do it on no money. And that's, I think, it's sort of counterintuitive. I mean, to me, it is intuitive, but to some people, I think it's counterintuitive. So I think that's one of the reasons we were able to make this movie, because the people on this movie had a lot, the crafts people on this movie had a lot of experience, among us. There was nobody who was just starting out. So you can solve problems that way. And someone who has done one thing can't solve those problems because they don't have that background and that experience. And so when I've been asked this question so many times, like, how could you have done this movie on $10 million? Oh, what can I say? We did it. We're not lying about the budget. I thought the budget was $6 million, actually. I really did. So, and of course, it's in Hungary. So the budget was probably higher, because labor is cheaper, but materials are incredibly expensive. So I don't even know how to talk about the budget, but we did it. And I think a lot of it was due to the fact that, we had among us, we had a lot of experience, and it's just figuring out how to spend the money, and how not to waste it, really, and what will look good and what won't. And I think especially in my area, you really need that experience, like not wasting money, what we're going to spend it on, how we're going to do the library, what we don't need in the library. It's very, very simple, the library. Doesn't have any waste, really. I don't know how someone else would have done it. I can only be myself. But it was pretty clear to me. It works in a way that I've worked before in Montreal, where I don't have my own construction crew. Everything is jobbed out to a construction company. So I, in fact, never met the construction crew. I saw them, but I never met them or the painters. I think I might have met a painter. So everything is done. The art directors communicate with the construction and the set and the painters, but I never did. And I never saw them. It's a very complicated system, especially when it's in another language that is really hard to learn. I mean, I'm impressed with how well almost everybody spoke English, because it's not easy. And the languages are not related at all. And so I've learned some words of Hungarian, but it wasn't like, working in Italy. I mean, I know if I worked in Italy for 5 months, I'd be fluent. I speak a little Italian, so I know I'd be fluent at the end of 5 months. But it's very hard. It's a very hard language to learn. So I kudos to all my crew, because they really did speak English. It's just always hard to learn all the ins and outs of what's the name of this material? What do you call it in California? Because we have different names in California and in the East Coast, and I had to learn those. And so I don't know, what do you call frisket in Hungary? I never found out, because I tried to describe it a million times, and all I got was foil. And I said, it's not foil in English, because foil is something you use to wrap sandwiches in, so I never found out what it was called. It was very hard to communicate about materials, really hard. And even Chaba, who was my really good art director, he lived in New York for a long time. His English was really great, but he didn't know those words, because, as he said, he wasn't an art director when he lived in New York, So it's those expressions, they're so hard, because they're not technical terms that get used in other languages, like when you hear, I don't know, there are words I've heard in French, for example, that are American words, but that are used in French filmmaking. These words aren't, because they're not that interesting and they're not that widely used. So that part was hard, that communication about materials. And, but overall, it ended up being an amazing experience. So, and I think my crew really wanted to do a great job, and they really rose to the occasion. And I've gotten a lot of great emails from them, and I want to thank them all. Long list, but they were great. So I would happily shoot there again. And now I would know like a little more about what is available and what isn't, so it would be even easier.
Was the choice of shooting in Hungary and Budapest purely financial, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what problems did that give you in terms of, a film that's mostly set in America?
It wasn't too bad in terms of the locations, because I'm very used to shooting a period film in a place where it doesn't take place. I've done it almost always. I don't know if I've ever shot a period film where it took place. I might have. I'd have to think about it a bit. But done a lot of period films, and mostly in other cities than where they take place. And it's sometimes been harder. Like, finding New York and Montreal was really hard. Like I remember that specifically. So finding Philadelphia and, the outskirts in Budapest wasn't that hard. It's a city that hasn't become modernized too much. And we didn't need that many locations that were really urban locations or that showed a lot of architecture, which really helped us a lot. It was not written in a way that made it too difficult to find. We had the mansion. There were aspects of it that looked a little European that we fixed both in camera and in post. We changed the color of the mansion in post. It was this very European yellow that you see a lot, and we changed it. I changed like the covered bridge that they go through looked very like Bavarian. So I made it look American. I changed the wood. So there were little things like that we did to make it look more American. And there's this industrial section of Budapest where we shot the furniture store and a lot of other stuff that looked like an industrial section of Philadelphia because, it hasn't changed. And I did a lot of research and it was almost indistinguishable. So we did a lot of location scouting and we had a pretty good location manager and just tried really hard. There's amazing mid-century architecture there, but doesn't look like American mid-century architecture. And I have fortunately, I think I have a really good knowledge of what is and what isn't appropriate for the United States. And Brady trusted me. And he has a good eye too. He knows. So we'd both look at this great staircase and we'd be like, that's amazing, but it's wrong, so we wouldn't shoot it. And it wasn't too bad a process. I've had harder times other places. So we managed to find what we needed without too many. I mean, there were the things that were the most difficult weren't necessarily because of the place or the period, or just because they were hard to find. Like, there's always that location that's really hard to find, and it's not the one you think it's going to be in the beginning.
No, so much of your work seems about the details of a set as well, like you're talking about earlier. That your aunt's room or house or whatever, and the details of a space. But so, what about the furniture and the set dressing? Was that a problem?
Well, yeah. I mean, it could have been. I wanted to dress. There wasn't a lot of set dressing in the movie, and that was an aesthetic decision. But the furniture showroom store, I wanted it to look extremely American, to show Attila's assimilation and also to say something about middle-class America in the post-war period. And I wanted it to have that, American colonial traditional furniture, which we all know. And I did due diligence and looked for it in Hungary. I looked at like 1,000 photographs of the prop shops there, and it was not there. None of it. There was nothing. Well, and then we got a quote on shipping a container from Canada. It was $35,000, which was a lot of money for this movie. And Patricia got a quote from the Canadian side for $5,000, which was an amazing difference. And that happened a lot in Hungary. If you got the quote from the North America, it was a lot cheaper than from Hungary for the same thing. So she shopped all that furniture in Canada. It's really cheap. I mean, all the furniture together cost like $1,000. And then she loaded up this container with a bunch of other stuff we needed that you could only find here. And she packed it full, and she went around, driving her car, like picking up all the furniture herself. So, in a way that very hands-on, like we all were in the beginning and now we're again. And that, unfortunately, the container arrived literally the day before we needed to shoot the furniture store.
Oh my.
It was very stressful, but it was supposed to arrive 3 weeks before, but there's red tape and things. So she had laid it all out. She had tape everywhere for what went where, and we got it done. And we had a couple more days to dress the apartment, which was literally upstairs in the location. So, and they got the period wallpaper up and made the curtains, and everything was done. So fortunately, I think, a lot of money was exchanged to get that container released. And So that was an important set, and that's how we dressed it. And then the other one, there was the first edition of the library, which was Art Deco in style, and something that I talked about with Brady as an idea that Harrison, it wasn't like just a rec or an old-fashioned library. It was something that had been fashionable because he likes to spend his money on what people think is correct, but it was outdated. I thought that was such a fun idea, like it's Art Deco. Some people love Art Deco now, but it was outdated in the 50s. So, and his son is like, ugh, it's outdated. And so that's very available in Budapest. And Patty found beautiful Art Deco furniture. And I think I knew that before I suggested it, because I didn't want to get into this problem of not being able to find it. Laszlo's guest house and tenement, I was very inspired by the way Marcel Breuer lived. And I also was thinking a lot about Laszlo's character, and that he's not going to buy furniture. He's going to design it himself out of cheap materials, but it's going to look beautiful. It's all going to be made out of plywood. And Marcel Breuer had tables made out of cinder blocks, literally, even when he had money. It's beautiful living room, and the tables are cinder blocks. It was gorgeous. So it was great. And I didn't know that plywood was really expensive in Budapest when I was doing all this. So I literally had to ask for an overage to buy a piece of plywood.
Wow.
And we had to, and we used every bit of it. If there was a scrap that was 15 inches wide, I would make an end table out of it. And so we made all his furniture. There was one kitchen table that we bought there in Budapest, and everything else was plywood. And I went to the flea market also every weekend. There were 3 flea markets, and I spent every weekend day going to one of them. So I went to flea markets both days, every week. I was obsessed with them. And I would buy a lot of stuff just with my own per diem or whatever and use it in the movie because they were amazing. And not a lot. It wasn't tons of American furniture that I would just buy and bring to the set, but it was fun just looking for stuff. And there were a lot of good architecture lamps, the kind you can't find anymore, that I did find at the flea market. So there were things like that we filled in with. We built a lot of the drafting tables, for the architecture office. It's cheaper to build a lot of the furniture, which we did. And I designed the Art Deco shelves that are in the first iteration of the library, and we built those. I would say that probably designed and built more furniture than usual because it just seemed to be more cost efficient. That was it. There was not a lot of furniture in the movie. So Harrison's heavy or antique furniture we also rented in Budapest. And then he had a huge art collection, which you never see, but we jobbed out to an artist I use a lot from the United States she can imitate any kind of art, and she prints it digitally, sends a file, you print it out on canvas, and then the scenics, paint over it. And it looks great. So we did a lot of that.
Oh, wow. And it was never seen.
Not much of it. Yeah. I know we dressed it like the Barnes Foundation at Philadelphia, where it's got all this impressionist and post-impressionist art that's hung like a gallery wall. It's just salon style, one thing on top of the other. It's filled with it. And we hung it like that. But, those dinner scenes, they were shot amazingly with the close-ups and stuff. So you don't really see the art behind them. But it's fine. So I like it better. But the art was there. And because it is a melodrama, as Brady is saying, and I was thinking of Douglas Sirk and the mother, we painted a huge portrait of his mother when she was young, and we used my husband's grandmother as an inspiration because she came from a wealthy family, and she had that kind of patrician look to her. And I showed a picture of her to Brady, and he's like, oh yeah, she's got a great face, so because everyone else came from some kind of ethnic or family or something that didn't look right, but she was Helen Boyd with her pearls and stuff. So we used a picture of her, and there was this full-length portrait of her that was never in the movie, but it was at the top of the stairs, looking down on everyone. So, and dressed in period dress, so.
How did you work on the building of the library? And how did you decide how much was going to be real? And
It was the first thing that we discussed because it was the biggest sort of puzzle of the movie.
Yeah.
So when I first got hired, it was like 4 years ago when I first got hired, because it was a while before we actually shot the movie. Brady asked me to design it at the Institute so that we would know what it looked like, and then we would know how to sort of chop it into pieces. And that's what I did. I designed it, and the design didn't change very much from that moment forward. And I did a lot of research into construction sites, and I had a great book called Building Brasilia, which was about the building of Brasilia, and it had amazing photographs that were taken. I guess it was probably a pretty famous project, so it was well documented. And I used a lot of reference from that and from other huge, like the building of Lincoln Center is well documented. So a lot of construction reference from the 50s. And I would just show them to Brady, and we would talk about things that were interesting about the building of concrete buildings and what would really signify it. Not necessarily, weren't really aiming for total accuracy, because we definitely didn't portray total accuracy, but it was more conceptual, like of these sort of massive, interesting elements that would happen when you're building a brutalist building. And we sort of planned out these different stages of construction that we would shoot almost like sculptures, and literally had a map, and we had little models that we would plant around and talk, and all of us. There's one picture that's been released to the public, like for PR a lot, where we're actually discussing that with Lowell. Like the three of us are out looking at these little miniatures, and we shot it all on a hillside. So it was like, we're going to build a staircase going into the ground, because that's a very significant of the Institute, that you enter it into the ground. And then this big grid, because that represents something about the construction, and the pillars with the rebar sticking out of them. It was more like, what's interesting about constructing a building that will make a statement when you look at it. And it was a long discussion. We talked about it for a long time and looked at different references. So it was really about a visual statement rather than a literal depiction of constructing a building.
how did you, though, decide on the budget you had where the join was between what you did live and what would be computer graphics?
There weren't many computer graphics. What we also did was shoot on location. So there were a lot of pieces of the building that were locations. I'd say 3 locations that we used as pieces of the building. And then for the church, where the light comes in and forms the cross, that was a grain silo. And where they're going through the water looking for Harrison, that was a reservoir in Budapest. And there was a house called Red, had been built as a house, and now it's a museum that we scouted. And a lot of different aspects of that were shot as pieces of the Institute, because it was a concrete brutalist building. So, and then I built a huge model. It's like 10 feet long. And I built an interior. I had it built, and it was built after the drawings, which I designed the interior and the exterior. So they built a model of it to look like concrete. And that was shot both for pieces of the Institute, and then on the hill, when you see the Institute with the cranes, that is a visual effects were used there, but with the model as the basis of it. Right. So so it was a kind of cool in-camera model to start with.
Right.
And inspired by a picture from Star Wars that we all saw. And then I was doing a Q&A in San Rafael, and a guy came up to me afterwards and said he had worked for Lucasfilms, and he was the chief model maker. And I found out his name, Lauren Peterson. He's in that picture that we had looked at of the model from Star Wars.
Oh, wow.
So it was such an amazing coincidence and sort of full circle. I told him that. I told him that we had looked at that. So that was one of the best experiences I've had in this whole post-movie experience, that meeting that guy that was in that picture that sort of started this whole inspiration for doing a model, which I've never done before, a model that was used as the building.
Yeah.
And then also in the movie behind grown-up Sophia at the Biennale, you see some images that were inside the model. So it's really cool to me. I would have liked to have done more of it, but gone through it, with those little pencil camera things. But yeah,
Certainly not with the VistaVision camera.
no, it would have broken apart. You know?
Yeah,
I was like, gosh.
What's one of your pet peeves design-wise when you see a movie done by someone else?
Overdressing, I think, is one of them.
That would be it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't guessed.
Yeah.
So, and I would say that overdressing when it's not motivated by the characters. You know, so I think I saw it recently in a movie, and it just takes me out of the movie. You know, I'm just start thinking about it. I start thinking about where'd that come from. And I even did that before I became a production designer. It would take me out of the movie. So I think it's something I really notice. And I think because all my life I've been interested in things. Sometimes I've been like, why am I so interested in material things? It's so superficial. But I've just learned to embrace it because it's something I find interesting, and it's part of my work now. And I do like them. So, they can be ugly, they can be beautiful, they can be an albatross around your neck. I mean, they can be everything, but they can use up all your money. They can be in a museum, but I've always noticed them. So when I see them in a movie and I feel like, why are they there? That really bothers me.
Yeah.
And certain colors can bother me too, of course, but that's a bigger thing. You don't know who picked them, like maybe the director did. So.
Yeah. I'm interested. You've done quite a lot of television more recently.
Yeah.
And you said it actually allowed you to build big sets and do things you weren't able to do in movies. Is that the attraction of television, or is there other restrictions in it for you?
No, I wanted to do television because I really like this kind of long form storytelling that's been happening. And I really enjoy watching it. I think a lot of great stories are being told on television. And there's been so many that I wished I had worked on because I found them fascinating. And I think the production design has been really good on a lot of shows. And I just got called, Ryan Murphy just called me up. He loved Carol, and he asked me to work on his Betty and Joan, which I think is a great show, and not enough people have seen it. I'm really proud of it. If I could just, lump the miniseries I've done with the movies I've done, I consider them the same thing, like same quality, same thing. And Betty and Joan, Versace are two of my favorite things I've done. I think they're great. Like really, I mean, I don't feel that way about every miniseries or every movie, but Versace was an amazing show to work on. And the sets that I got to do, I wish everything could be like that. I got to do high and low, and we changed the movie goes backwards, and so the sets change in time. It's like from everything to nothing, and it was just fascinating. And you would never get to do that in a movie because a movie is not like 8 hours long or however long that series was. So getting to work on that kind of format when one person has a vision for the look of the whole thing, that's a rare opportunity. It's not like working on a sitcom. It's a really special thing to get to do. And I loved working with, and Ryan, he's a great person to work with for me. I really loved working with him. And he called me up and told me how much he loved The Brutalist, which really meant a lot to me. So he's for me, a really wonderful person to work with. And I got to do some great projects with him. It just was a really lucky time for me. So I didn't want to live in California forever. So that was the one thing that was hard because he shoots mostly in California. And I really am a diehard New Yorker. So eventually I had to go home. But other than that, it was great, really great.
Thank you for doing this. This has been so interesting. Really.
This was really fun. It was great to get to talk about a lot of stuff, because lately it's been just one thing, which is a great thing, but yeah.
But it's interesting to to learn about, what you do. It's good.
Yeah, it's always, and I love hearing about it. I love hearing other people talk about their craft and how they got to it. So
everybody has such a different story.
And also,
it's so fascinating.
Movie making is indeed a collaboration. The more you know about what other people are putting into it, the more you can understand that they can't have it done that right then. They need more
Yeah.
time or whatever.
Oh, I love it when I'm Joy, I think, that we had this huge set that was like going to be ready in 2 months. And they're like, can you pull that up for next week? And I'm like, oh, no, no, I can't. And they're like, why? The producers, right? Why? And I was like, how do I even start to explain this? Like, it just is, it's so obvious to me. But if they don't know why, I don't know how to tell them why. So it's like...
Yeah, well, it's a good chance to explain to them what you do.
I know. Yes.
It's funny
Yeah,
that
that's why we need
producers
more-
often seem the most ignorant of what people do.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I think that I might stay at the 10 million level because, there's just, everybody sees what you do. Like, there's not
Yeah.
enough people.
Yeah. And everybody's working together because they have to get through it.
Exactly. Like the producers were right there. So when I said I need my American art director, they were like, yeah, you too. So,
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
yeah.
Very good.
Well, good.
Well,
Right,
thank you
Judy.
so much for
Okay.
this
Thank you very
opportunity.
much.
I
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed it. It was
No,
great.
Lovely.
Thank you. It was great.
All right.
All right.
Best of
Thank
luck.
you.
Cheers.
Bye.
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 If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.